Hi, this is Linda with the Life Station Express, the relay station. We bring the news to you, and I really want to finish reading this book. I'm on page 34, and I hope you've come on this journey with me. And I must tell you, last night, I don't know how, but I started coughing. So this morning, I was coughing a lot. My nose is a little stuffy. I slept like in 20-minute intervals last night, so it seemed like as soon as I would get to sleep, then my nose would get stuffy and I'd start coughing, some drainage and all that fun stuff. Anyway, I'm going to try to get through this as far as I can because I wanted to really continue with the reading of this book. And again, here's the title. And it says, The Return of Jesus. And where are we now on the biblical timeline? Jesus kept his word. So sorry, I sound rough. I'm so sorry. This is the bottom of page 34, the end times / end of the age. And I got a lot of understanding with this. Working on the basis that Jesus has already returned, just like he said he would, the tribulation, main resurrection of the saints, and most of the events of Revelation will have already happened, coinciding with the destruction of the temple and the return of Jesus. The vile judgments will have already been poured out on the world during what was literally the end times, or the end of the age, as spoken of by Jesus and eminently expected by the apostles and all the believers at that time. Let's see, I need to see if that helps. I've got a little light over here. It's not very bright. Many have let their imaginations run wild about the end times, instead of adhering strictly to what the Bible tells us. Yes, it would have been cataclysmic to live through, but it wasn't necessarily the literal end of the world, and there must have been survivors, possibly a great many. The hills melted like wax at the presence of the Lord. At the presence of the Lord of the whole earth. Psalm 97:5. There is a large area of research called meltology, which focuses on the evidence of catastrophic heat events that have happened all over the world, with melted cities, rock formations, and mountains that can still be seen today, all displaying signs of being melted by very extreme heat. There is clear evidence of heat having been generated that was so intense it could literally melt rock like candle wax, and it's still visible at locations all over the earth. For example, in places like Petra in Jordan, and I'm going to spell this, Derinkuyu, which is part of Cappadocia region in modern-day Turkey. The first angel sounded, and there followed hail and fire mingled with blood, and they were cast upon the earth. And the third part of the trees were burnt up, and all the green grass was burnt up. Revelation 8:7. The book of Revelation tells us a third part of the trees of the earth were burned up, which corresponds exactly to the 1/3 of the earth being classified as desert today. What a coincidence. Egypt, which was once the fertile breadbasket of the Middle East, is now covered in sand, and the geographical location of modern Israel certainly does not resemble anything like its biblical description of the land of milk and honey, or the joy of the whole earth. Take a look at it from above. Instead, they look like they have suffered severe judgment. The destruction of the old world at the end of the age was further foretold in the following verses. And the heavens departed as a scroll when it was rolled together, and every mountain and island were moved out of their places. Revelation 6:14. And every island fled away, and the mountains were not found. Revelation 16:20. The Appalachian Mountains on the east coast of North America share a unique geographical link with the Caledonian mountain range on the west coast of the Scottish Highlands, indicating they were once joined together, forming one unified mountain range. Even the controlled scientific world tells us that at one time the Earth was a single supercontinent called Pangaea. That subsequently broke apart But as per their usual Big Bang evolution false timeline narrative, they estimate it happened hundreds of billions of years ago, when in reality it was likely in our very recent past, like after Jesus returned and judgment was poured out, which fits perfectly with the biblical timeline. The understanding that the gospel message had already gone out to the world at that time, as Paul clearly said it had, makes a lot more sense if it was one single land mass. And it also explains why America is never mentioned in the Bible. We are told up to a third of the world's population were killed by the bubonic plague sometime around the somewhere around the mid 1300s. Although based on the findings of the alternative history community and the fabrication of our chronological timeline, the real date is anyone's guess at this point. And then we have the so-called AD 536 event, where we are told from multiple sources and cultures that much of the world went dark for around 18 months, covered in intense fog and smoke. As we have no way of knowing the true dates of these events, or whether in reality they were much closer together, because our timeline simply cannot be trusted. Clearly, some very significant events do appear to have happened in our past that align with what the Bible tells us in the book of Revelation. So yes, if we are willing to awake from our indoctrinated slumber, there's plenty of evidence that God has already poured out his wrath on the world, if we know where to look for it and have the time to do the research. We also have the Josephus Tacitus reports of multiple eyewitness accounts describing unusual and ominous celestial events observed in the sky around the time of the destruction of the temple in 70 AD. We obviously have to rely on what our controllers and the world tell us about early historians and also the so-called church fathers, but it's likely at least some of it is true, because it seems to be the pattern to mix in some truth along with the lies. So the following accounts are at least interesting. Besides these, a few days after that feast, on the 21st day of the month of Artemisius, a certain progenious and incredible phenomenon appeared. I suppose the account of it would seem to be a fable, were it not related by those who saw it, and were not the events that followed it of so considerable a nature as to deserve such signals. For before sunsetting, chariots and troops of soldiers in their armor were seen running about among the clouds and surrounding of cities. That's from Josephus, The Jewish War, Book 6, Chapter 5, Section 3. In the sky appeared a vision of armies in conflict, of glittering armor, a sudden lightning flash from the clouds up to the temple. The doors of the holy place abruptly opened. A superhuman voice was heard to declare that the gods were leaving it, and in the same instant came the rushing tumult of their departure. That's from Tacitus, Histories, Book 5, Chapter 13. And the further report from Josephus of the mysterious sword-like star that appeared and lingered for about a year prior to the fall of Jerusalem and the destruction of the temple in 70 AD. Thus there was a star resembling a sword which stood over the city, and a comet that continued a whole year. Josephus, The Jewish War, Book 6, Chapter 5, Section 3. Now, the juicy stuff. Oh, sorry. I'm so sorry. The millennial kingdom and reign of Christ. Revelation 20 tells us that at some point after the second coming and all the catastrophic events associated with the end times, Jesus will establish his millennial kingdom with the saints and mortals who survived, presumably, which we are told 6 times in Revelation will last for 1,000 years. I am aware that partial preterism believes this to be a spiritual reign, which is currently ongoing. But personally, I believe it to have been a physical kingdom that was set up here on earth and lasted a literal 1,000 years. That's what the author says. This is because the millennial reign has a definite beginning and end. The context implies a literal 1,000 years, and also because Revelation 5:10 tells us, "And hast made us unto our God kings and priests, and we shall reign on the earth." That's not to say the saints wouldn't have been able to move between the physical and spiritual realm in their glorified bodies, but I believe in essence it was a physical kingdom on earth. At this point, many become confused with questions like, "But if Christ reigned on earth for 1,000 years, why isn't it in the history books?" Or, "People would just know about it." Or, "Wouldn't it be on the news?" Unfortunately, displaying our lifelong indoctrination and programming. This is where the alternative history comes in and the fabrication of our past. Based on the findings of those who have properly studied the subject, it's possible our true history only started around 200 years ago, and everything before that is open to question, and much of it is likely false. The only thing we can trust is God's word, which he has preserved for us as promised for all this time, so we can know the truth. We are told the period known as the Dark Ages lasted 1,000 years, and this roughly coincided with what we are told was the Byzantine Empire. Have you ever looked at the art that depicts that era, where everyone appears to be sporting a halo? And isn't the Dark Ages exactly what Satan would call the millennial reign of Christ, hidden in plain sight, as the truth so often is? So where was Satan during the millennial reign? This is from Revelation 20, verse 1 through 3, tells us, "And I saw an angel come down from heaven, having the key of the bottomless pit, and a great chain in his hand. And he laid hold on the dragon, that old serpent which was the devil and Satan, and bound him 1,000 years, and cast him into the bottomless pit, and shut him up, and set a seal upon him, that he should deceive the nations no more, till the 1,000 years should be fulfilled. And after that he must be loosed a little season." Contrary to what some apparently believe, the Bible doesn't suggest at all that during the millennial reign, Satan is on some kind of leash that allows him to come out of the pit and cause a bit of havoc now and again. It tells us in no uncertain terms he is locked up with a seal put upon him for the entire 1,000 years. So assuming Jesus returned as he said he would, the end times has already happened, and the millennial reign has come and gone, has been and gone. Is there any potential evidence of that remaining on earth? Yes, there is. There is plenty of existing evidence all over the world, although much of it has been destroyed, that there was a highly advanced civilization capable of impossible architecture that lasted right up until the start of our quite recent history, which does not align with the official historical narrative. The area of research is called Tartaria. I must admit, for some reason, I don't really like the name and prefer to think of it as old world buildings and structures, but it's a highly relevant subject that requires time to research and understand properly. And I will say that when I started looking into Tartaria, which came into be kind of a thing for people to look at, the old world maps that had the area of Tartaria written on them, was extremely interesting. And that's where a lot of people got their start into delving into what was that all about and what was the timing. And there was clearly an unexplained worldwide civilization that existed up to about 200 to 300 years ago that our history books tell us nothing about. So you have to wonder, why hide it? Why would they do that and put so much effort into it to the point of completely rewriting our history? I can't do the research for you, but just as an example, take a look at the old world buildings of Dresden before it was carpet bombed in World War II, and ask yourself honestly, how on earth were they built? When? And by whom? The general idea is these impossible beautiful buildings that should not exist according to what we have been told, were likely created during the millennial reign. From what I've seen, it just seems to be the most plausible explanation, and many Christians now are making that exact link. Yes, I get it. It's a lot to wrap your head around. If this is all new information to you, and your cognitive dissonance may be knocking at the door, but take some time to process it and weigh it up with everything else we've covered. The Bible then tells us that after the millennial reign has expired, at the end of the 1,000 years, Satan will be loosed out of his prison for a little season. And then this section is on page 43. We're getting to the end of this book, right? Sorry. Okay. The little season of Revelation 20, verse 7 and 8. And when the 1,000 years were expired, Satan shall be loosed out of his prison. Revelation 20, verse 7. Chapter 20 of the book of Revelation is where everything happens in relation to the little season. And the above is the key verse that is completely off the radar. It never seems to be talked about or taught in churches, and is generally ignored or just skipped over as a footnote, which I find telling. In Revelation 20, verse 8, we are then told that after his release, Satan shall go out to deceive the nations, which are in the four corners of the earth, Gog and Magog, to gather them together to battle, the number of whom is as the sand of the sea. So we know that the little season is definitely going to happen at some point, and when it does, there will still be nations around or peoples. So would those nations know that they are in the little season? I highly doubt it. The deceive the nations part is very important, because the deception simply wouldn't work if everyone knew what was going on and that the millennial reign has been and gone. So working on the basis that Jesus did return, as he said he would, it is possible we could actually be in this period known as Satan's little season right now. I believe the answer is yes, it is possible. Once Satan was released, the very first thing he would do is set about hiding what the millennial reign had ever happened. He could do that within a couple of generations and re-educate the survivors, many of whom it appears were orphan children. If you don't think Satan could hide the evidence of the millennial reign, think about how the world was deceived over the last 4 years. And this was in the age of the internet and smartphone. If this world still exists in 100 years, his story will show we lived through something on a par with the Black Death, instead of what really happened, which I won't go into now. For the last 200 years or so, there has been a very deliberate and coordinated anti-God agenda, and the lies we've all been fed our entire lives are so huge they've completely altered people's perception of what they think reality is. Most people are so confused by now they've given up even trying to know what the truth is. I don't think the vast majority of people can get even close to comprehending the scale of the deception and lies we have been subject to our whole lives. It has completely permeated the world around us. Look at the King James Bible. Look at what the King James Bible tells us in Genesis 1 about the true nature of the earth and the realm that we live in, yet how many believe it, including Christians? If the satanic controllers would lie to the entire world about something as massive as that, then nothing is off the table. After destroying much of the evidence of the old world holdings that existed during our reign, and with control being given over all the levers of worldly power, Satan and his minions could effectively erase the memory of the millennial reign having ever happened within 50 to 100 years. I know this brings up a lot of questions, as it did for me, like, what about church history, or the rise of Islam, or whatever else comes to mind? But remember how much we've been lied to, and that we are completely dependent on whatever we are told by those who hold the power as being the truth. And I believe now with any certainty is what the Bible says. We're not given many details about the little season, so all we can really do is speculate on when it might have started and how long it will last. The general consensus is it likely began sometime from the mid 1700s to the mid 1800s, during the transfer of power that alternative history suggests took place. A key date prophesied in 1776, which was the declaration of, proposed, not prophesied. A key date proposed is 1776, which was the Declaration of American Independence, as represented by the state of liberty, quote, liberty. It's widely believed that this statue represents all right, that's 20 minutes. Let's see how far we can go. Represents Satan having been set free. Take a look at the obvious symbology of the broken chains at the feet of the statue and the striking similarity with the 1797 painting by Thomas Lawrence of Satan summoning his legions. There is a question over the length of time and of the little season, not least because of Joshua 24:7. The 40 years the Israelites went wandering in the wilderness was described as a long season. However, it is possible that the little season could be in direct relation to the length of the 1,000-year reign, with a quarter of that time, a season, being 250 years, which means we're near the end. On the other hand, maybe after the millennial reign ended, Satan's minions who had never bowed the knee to Jesus during his reign then had the time they needed to prepare the world for the coming release of their master, which could have actually happened much more recently. Or maybe it just takes as long as it takes, or when God says that's enough. The simple answer is we don't know for sure about the exact timings because the Bible doesn't explicitly tell us. We also have the interesting question of who we are if we're living in the little season. That was the question I had for sure. The only real clue we have is in Revelation 20, verse 5, which tells us, "But the rest of the dead lived not again until the 1,000 years were finished." But then, in a somewhat awkward addition to this verse, which doesn't seem to make sense or be in context, it finished the verse with, "This is the first resurrection." The first or main resurrection will have taken place at the return of Jesus around 70 AD. So it's not really clear what is actually being referred to in Revelation 20, verse 5, other than if we are in the little season right now, then we are the rest of the dead. This can unfortunately trigger an emotional response, especially for those who have put their faith in the idea of being raptured and getting to be a saint ruling with Christ for 1,000 years. But the reality is, it is possible we could be the descendants of those who did not believe. And by God's grace, we've all been given the opportunity to turn to Him now. We don't really know, but the gospel is still being preached and people are still being saved. So does it really matter? We are promised eternal life, not that we're going to be a saint ruling in the millennial kingdom for 1,000 years. So where is Jesus now? That's a question a lot of people ask. Again, we don't know because the Bible does not give us any details of where He and the saints go after the millennial reign comes to an end. But it seems unlikely it would be a physical place on earth that is accessible or even perceivable by us. The saints that ruled with Christ during the millennial reign will most likely be spiritually hidden somewhere with Jesus and will reappear at the appointed time. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. All right. This has gone for 24 minutes, so I don't want you to be like, oh goodness, Linda, this is going on so long. I only have 6 pages left to go. I think I will stop here, let my voice take a little rest, and maybe get some hot tea or something, and then this afternoon I will go ahead and finish the rest in another video. And I will. This will be part 4, and that will be part 5, and then that will be the end. And I would love, when this is finished, for any of you that have comments or questions to put those below, just so we can discuss. This is, I find it fascinating. I find it very interesting. Another subject that kind of goes along with this is some of the things, not just the Byzantine era, beautiful, beautiful buildings, but some of the music, some of the composers, some of the, even some of the songs that we sing and we've sung for years. How close to the end of that millennial reign did those songs transfer over into our time period? I just think that's fascinating. So anyway, I'll leave it here. This is Linda with the Life Station Express, the relay station. We bring the news to you. And again, I'm sorry my voice sounds terrible, but I want to get this finished today because this is Friday, and I want to be able to have anybody that wants to listen to it or talk about it have the completed book, complete the book. So I will do that this afternoon, and I'll be back with you. All righty, I appreciate it. Thank you.